Hey, everybody. I am Tom Burton. I am your guest host today. I'm super excited to be your guest host today on the Salesman on Fire podcast. And just so you know, I am the co-founder of Lead Smart Technologies and the author of the Revenue Zone book. And speaking of revenue zones, we have an awesome guest today on our show, Carson Hetty, that has taken Revenue Zone to a whole nother level and closed a 9-figure deal on LinkedIn. I don't know. That sounds interesting to me. I don't know about anybody else, but Carson, welcome to your show. Welcome to your own
Thanks,
show.
Tom. Thanks, Tom. Hey, this is a great example of I never say no to something that sounds fun. So, we had a conversation recently on LinkedIn, and here we are making a show. So, thank you.
Yeah. So I would say let's just jump right into this. How did this start? Like, how did this deal start on LinkedIn? How did it transpire? Take us through it.
Yeah, I think a lot of people now understand the value of social selling or digital selling, whatever you want to call it, especially in light of the pandemic. It's become so much more prominent. But because of that, doing it right and doing it effectively and making sure that it's very grounded in fundamentals is so key. Yeah, I started doing social selling 9 years ago. When I worked for a small consultant firm. And so I believed in it then because it got me the audience that I needed. And, I've always heard like, hey, you need to get into other rooms of the house and into other industry, other business units within your groups and companies that you're working with. And so this is something that I started doing a long time ago. So lots of tweaks that have transpired. So it really, for me, it's always come down to the quality of messaging. I think it needs to be counterintuitive to get a meeting, the quantity of outreach. So I take a scale approach to try to get a lot of different contacts and enhance my probability of getting the meeting. And then lastly, consistency. I'm a believer in sacred prospecting every day, every week. So the way this started, Tom, was outreach within an organization. I started supporting them a few years back. And it's ironic, I was the individual contributor at that point in time. I had an extended team and did some outreach to a couple hundred director and above within this organization, and got a meeting with the president of the organization. I was in his office the following week and gave him a copy of our CEO's book, highlighted some passages that talk about our transformation that I knew would resonate. I really just plugged in and listened. So again, for me, social selling was the door opener here. But as we'll unpack in this conversation, a lot of sales fundamentals still applied.
Well, and I assume to get that meeting, right, it wasn't what we see all the time. You connect and then, hey, can I get you 15 minutes on a call? I would assume there was probably a lot of value and a lot of back and forth conversation that occurred prior to even getting to that meeting, I assume, right, to get to that point.
I'm so glad you said that. Using intel that you have, whether it's things that you can see on their website or in company reports or in industry trade magazines, or even things that you're hearing from other people in their organization that may work for them or in different lines of business, using all of that as intel is only going to enhance your probability of success. I also very often use a counterintuitive approach when I first reach out, because oftentimes we might have some level of investment with the organization today, but we're likely not working directly with the person that I'm reaching out to in this case. So making sure that, to your point, Tom, that we're showing up with some kind of value and that we are, we have a very targeted ask that we're trying to make. Now, in this case, my approach typically is, hey, you were likely entitled to some resources as a result of our pre-existing relationship. I'd love to make sure that you and your team are aware of those resources, privy to those resources that you're entitled to. And I've found that often that will at least get some interest. And in this case, I utilize that as the door opener to get in the door. And then at which time, all of the usual sales fundamentals apply. Now, the other element of social here for me, Tom, somebody told me this years ago, utilize it to stay top of mind. So the other component is not only does it serve as kind of that door opener, that initial touch point, but also over time, as people see posts, or you invite them to events, or you send them newsletters or surveys or things like that, you can continue to engage them over time. They're not necessarily going to take that first meeting request, but over time, if you play the scale game, and over the subsequent months, I mean, I sent over 500 connection requests within that one organization. I had 250 first degree connections in that organization. Wow. So over the subsequent months and years, it was really just all about creating a groundswell, so that our name was prominent. My name was prominent as their primary resource, and just continuing to invest and nurture that relationship.
I think there's a couple of huge things that you just mentioned there that I want to just touch on to spotlight. One is, like you said, this was an enterprise sale, clearly. So this wasn't about connecting with one person, and this was about connecting with a bunch of people and a bunch of different stakeholders, and making sure that you were providing value and building relationships with a whole bunch of the different stakeholders within the organization. I mean, obviously, that's really a different when you start thinking about an enterprise B2B sale, right? That's a key thing versus just connecting with what you believe is a decision maker and trying to do it from there. The other thing that was really, I thought, a knowledge bomb that you dropped a second ago was when you went back to them and said, hey, I have some things here that I want to make sure that you should have access to, you're entitled to. I care that you actually are getting and seeing this information, right? I mean, people love that. People love that approach versus, hey, do you want to download my white paper or attend my webinar? No, I already have some things here that I know you should have access to already. I want to make sure you have them. And so you're really adding that, hey, I'm here to help you and I'm looking out for you. And I think that's a huge knowledge bomb, if you will, in terms of how you build that relationship.
Well, and it's the truth, because what's the worst thing that we do or can do? We show up and we start regurgitating everything that we think's swell about our solution, just hoping that something resonates with them and they say, oh yeah, let me send you a purchase order. It doesn't work that way. The key element is we've got to create the relationship based on synergies, a lot of which we may be able to see or know. And the more conversations we have, the more we put ourselves in the driver's seat. I look at it like an octopus. You want to get in and you want to spread your tentacles in a way that you're touching multiple different lines of business, and you have a firm understanding of what matters. What's at the pulse of this organization? What makes them tick? What is going to solve their business problems? What's top of mind? How do you deliver? And what is a win for these different folks? And so for me, Tom, what was the most impactful thing was about a year into the relationship, we finally set up this pretty elaborate executive briefing, and had several different lines of business represented. But what I thought was most fascinating was, as we were talking about some of the different art of the possible type of things, they kept saying, well, hey, absolutely, if we prove this out, or if this ends up coming to fruition, we'll introduce you to this executive who leads this business, or this executive who leads that business. And I was like, oh, you mean Jeff? Yeah, we actually talked 2 weeks ago. This was kind of his way of thinking, and let's this is already kind of in motion, right? Or absolutely, you're talking about Mary. Yeah, Mary and I have connected. I'm talking with Ryan on her team, and this is the use case, right? So you put yourself in a position of strength because you create a groundswell of excitement and momentum, and it's all based on probability. Because look, you or I both, Tom, I don't care how good your pitch is, I don't care how good your product is. We could make 10 phone calls and go 0 for the room. We may completely strike out. But if I reach out to 500 people in an organization, guess what? I'll get some meetings. And that's what it's based on, is creation of momentum. Now, this just happened to be one that that went exactly the way you want it to. On paper, it had a great start and a great finish. There were a lot of twists and turns, including a pandemic in between, but we still got it done.
Well, and we're going to go into the kind of the journey a bit more in a minute, but I just wanted to touch on, again, another very important thing I believe you just said. By developing that breadth of relationships, it makes it easier for them then, I won't just say to say yes, but to continue the process, right? They don't have to go sell, wait a minute, I got to go sell Mary and Jeff, and I got to bring her in and make sure that no, I've already got the relationship over there. Oh yeah, Carson, I love them. I love that what they're doing. You're making it really easy for them to take the next steps and move them down the road, because you've already set up a lot of the internal framework that they need to be able to get that buy off. That's huge.
You said something super important there. It is. It's about breadth and also depth of relationship. So
Yes.
making sure that you have a broad approach, but that you deeply understand what looks like a win to these different business units. Some of the best deals that I've ever closed have had multiple use cases so that you can kind of create that swarm. We also, don't make them sell your product. If you have the relationship, you're not relying on somebody to go back and sell something up a level. You already have that relationship. Now
Exactly.
it helps to find the whisperers within the organization, like those people that are reporting back to you, like what's the barometer, what's the pulse? Finding those key relationships in any deal is super helpful. We had that too, but it took a lot of twists and turns. But yeah, control the controllables.
No, and I think that that's awesome. So let's move ahead and take a look at the journey. So you got the meeting, right? You started down the road. Did you continue to use social and LinkedIn, even once you started having live conversations? It seems like you could really start to build that into more of a hybrid approach, right? Where you're doing the traditional on-site phone calls, other meetings, but at the same time, you're actually continuing to build socially. So kind of take us through that.
Yeah, it's a very astute observation, Tom. I mean, look, I'm a believer in employing all of the tools in your tool set, right? So that's why social has helped me, because it enables me to scale. I can reach out to a lot of people, try to get meetings. And then when you get somebody who's ready to talk, you've got to gravitate toward that. And so a lot of those meetings started to take place in person at the time, then virtually in the pandemic. And then as things kind of opened back up, there was more in person. There was, and this trusty guy, the telephone too. Lots of these conversations on the phone with some of these executives as things were progressing and heating up and priorities were shifting and things were changing and executives were retiring and new executives were being named, and all of those types of things that get in every deal. Those happened here. So there were a lot of different mediums that were employed. Now, as far as social's presence in this, what I think super powerful about social is, if I'm connected with 250 people at an organization where I'm trying to make a meaningful deal happen with them, I can't talk to all 250 of those people in a day, a week, maybe not even a month. But if you're doing events or you want to invite them to things or you want to post things that are meaningful or you see an article that might resonate with those folks, it takes mere seconds to do some of those things. I mean, I don't know if you're aware, like if you do a LinkedIn event, you could do a webinar, you could do it in person. You can invite 1,000 people a week to these events. And so, we'll do these events with my team all the time. It's a super powerful way to touch thousands of people on a regular basis. The other element would be just like seeing articles or seeing posts. And heck, at the beginning of the pandemic, I used social a lot to send even video messages to our customers just to let them know we were here as a resource, right? It was an uncertain time of uncertainty. And so social was a great way to have a personal connection, but to do it in a very non-intrusive way. So I think the key element is think about how social can enhance your process. And everybody's process is going to be personal to them. But those are some of the ways that have worked for my team and I.
Well, again, yet another knowledge bomb, as I heard there, is you mentioned as new people came in, right? You had new players, you had turnover, possibly different executives and all that. Now you can go back in almost immediately as soon as they come on board, connect with them, and you're building a relationship maybe even faster with them than they are with the rest of their company, right? And you can actually help them and enable them be successful in their new role, and you become an opinion leader and a thought leader. And what's the perfect world, right? You're the trusted advisor and you're becoming a trusted advisor, even maybe before other people in their organization are.
That's it, Tom. Years ago, I closed a multi-million-dollar deal that started on LinkedIn because I saw it was social listening. I saw a C-level change. I was in his office before anybody else. They had a very siloed approach. They were using us, but also multiple competitors. And got in his office the following week. He was moving from another state and city, and just welcomed him, used the same approach. You're entitled to resources. Was in his office the following week, and it was the beginning of something beautiful. I got a good understanding of what he needed out of a resource, what was going to look like a win to him. I described the history of working with that organization, which had been friendly, but there wasn't a lot to work with up to that point. And a year later, we have a nice big deal. So the same fundamentals are going to apply. All of these things, we can't let them be showstoppers when things change. In fact, again, it goes back to controlling the controllables. Social lets me see all of these things. And it's not just LinkedIn. It's not just Sales Navigator.
Right.
I subscribe to email alerts for every customer I support. I subscribe to business journals. I subscribe to industry trade magazines. It's anything and everything that you can get that kind of feeds you information that helps you make better decisions.
Well, what that tells me is you have the social pulse, right, on the organization.
Love that.
And let's face it, even within an organization, very few people have the social pulse of that organization. So you're inherently, your social IQ, if you will, and your social pulse in that organization. I mean, that's a big advantage, and especially when you've got a lot of moving parts and a lot of things. So I think that's something that we don't always think about. The value of the social part of it is not just the connection. It's not just a conversation. It's using that breadth that we talked about a bit more holistically to have that social pulse on the organization, which not only makes sense for an enterprise deal, but even if you're not selling as large a deal, but you want to keep repeat sales into that customer, you want to build lifetime value with that customer, that social pulse can really, really be a huge advantage.
What's really important about what you just said, Tom, is one of the greatest values that you can often bring to an organization is the intel that you have. So, as you create this groundswell, the ability for me to relay the priority that somebody in a different business unit has to the president or somebody else in the C-suite that they don't know about, but I do, that's of immense value. That's how you earn the right to be the trusted advisor. The other element too is as you do this with one organization, this is now a replicatable process. I can go back and look at some of the key areas that were successful, or maybe the areas where something stalled or whatever it is. And all of these things will inform me in the future as I and my team try to see around corners. And so, it just makes us better. Ironically, one of the senior people that I had a relationship with ended up retiring, but then later was on the board at a customer that I ended up supporting later. So, these things, these investments, these relationships, these are gifts that keep on giving. And that's why I go back to the octopus. You try to get your tentacles in as much as you can so you can learn and you can grow and you can invest in these relationships, but you never know where things are going to go.
No, and absolutely. And I think that's, the time that we had left, you touched on a couple of things I want to talk about is, first of all, is what you did repeatable and scalable, right? And it sounds like it is. There's actually a process that starts to evolve out of this that could actually go into a playbook, right? I mean, as salespeople and business people, we like to have playbooks and things that can repeat and can scale. And, a lot of times you even hear, right, oh, that person's really good at social, but our other team isn't. Well, obviously that's going to have to change, right? More and more teams are going to have to become social. So yeah, my first question on that, it sounds like you were able to come up with a scalable or at least a process on this that could be repeatable.
Yes. And I mean, this is something, because this was years ago where it kind of started. So, it's been a process that's been applied, and there's many, many relationships and opportunities that have come as a result. But, whatever your role is, if you're a seller, you're a leader, it's critical to just map out and understand your playing field. We just started a new fiscal year, so I've been spending a lot of time looking back at last year and what worked, what didn't, that might need to be tweaked or jettisoned. And then how do I get more focused on the big rocks, the things that are really going to matter and be impactful for the team? I think a lot of times as sellers, we have a tendency to chase everything. And so, we've got to make sure that we're really gravitating toward those most impactful relationships, those most impactful opportunities, and those most impactful investments. And so it's absolutely replicatable because you can take this approach. It's a probability game. I like to call it a Moneyball approach. You saw that movie with Brad Pitt playing Billy Beane of the Athletics and how they were trying to compete with no budget versus some of these big teams. And it was a data-driven approach. It was basically taking the statistics element, taking all the personal elements out of it, boiling it down to stats. And that's what this is. It's a scale approach going back to I can optimize the quality of my messaging, and that's going to be personalized to the organization or maybe the executive that you're reaching out to. You can focus on the quality, then the quantity of outreach. So, in this case, I reached out to 500 people in this organization. And then lastly, the consistency over time. You don't just go out and prospect a day at a time and expect things to come back. You've got to make sure you have that sacred prospecting hour every day, every week, whatever that looks like. But those are the key elements. And if you continue to invest in these things, I've absolutely had social selling efforts that didn't work in certain customers yet. But I've also had some that over a 3-year span, I had a deal years ago that customer wouldn't give me the time of day year 1. By year 3, they started kind of scampering out of the forest, and they were showing up on our webinars and responding to our newsletters, and we got a deal done by the end of year 3. You never know when these things are going to come to fruition, but these are deposits that you're making. It's like playing the stock market. Yep. These are deposits that you're making. If you invest consistently and you bet big on the long haul, you win.
Well, and speaking of Moneyball, one of my favorite lines in there is adapt or die. And I would believe if you are not really starting to become fluent as a salesperson, especially an enterprise salesperson or a larger ticket B2B salesperson, if you're not becoming fluent with social selling and your competitor salespeople are, you're at a big disadvantage, right? I mean, I just listened to what you just talked about. I would not want to compete with you as a salesperson with the advantage that you had using all the social digital selling that you just went through if I wasn't doing it. And I would be nervous, right, if I'm going to continue to run into that. So to me, this isn't about, hey, this would be nice to try or sort of a luxury. It almost needs to become essential part of that playbook to remain competitive or adapt or die, going back to the Moneyball piece.
I love that. I mean, the reality, Tom, is look, if you're not using social, you're discriminating against a very viable path to creation of and nurturing of relationships. So you're putting yourself behind the 8 ball. Yeah. Now, but it's also on the flip side of that, it's not the end all be all. You can't, as we just articulated, you can't close a deal on LinkedIn. Nobody's sending me a purchase order on LinkedIn. So what's happening is it's opening the door, and it's giving me an opportunity to stay top of mind with this organization. But I still had to meet with this customer. I had to make sure that that meeting was full of value and enough to entice them to a second date. I had to make sure that I was bringing in the right resources and ensuring that they understood the value that we could bring. There was a cast of hundreds that was involved in this deal over the last few years, and none of it could have been done without those elements. They had major changes to their organization and their priorities. In fact, the whole trajectory of the deal shifted. In fact, I no longer even covered them on paper the last year. I basically I got promoted, moved into a different side of the organization, and it was my replacement who came in and she kept me abreast of what was going on, and I was an advisor through part of this, but she brought the deal home. So there was a lot of things that happened throughout those 2.5 years to make this happen, but none of it would have happened without opening the door with social.
Yeah. And even though this was like, a 2.5-year deal and hundreds of people, as I keep listening, though, there's so many takeaways of what you just talked about that could apply to a deal with one person or two person that's going to take 90 days, right? It's what you did is a different order of magnitude, but the concepts of what you're talking about and even the social pulse that we were just talking about and the just, using the tools properly, the size of the deal doesn't matter. It's just how you're applying it based on the magnitude. The same principles occur.
Honestly, I was just as tickled when I got one done several years ago that I went in thinking was going to be in the small thousands. And it was a small organization. There were maybe 11, I think they had 50 employees, and I managed to connect with like 20 of them on LinkedIn. 11 of them replied to my note, and I got a meeting with one of them finally. And we went in, I brought in a couple of my colleagues, more on the technical side. And, it was just kind of a match at first sight, and we uncovered a really big competitive opportunity in that first meeting. It ended up being a multi-million-dollar deal. I went in thinking it was going to be a few grand, and it ended up being a multi-million-dollar deal. And that was when I really clicked, like, this is viable, this is real. And I've had 15 deals that have happened like this in my 8+ years here. And it's amazing to me that people don't leverage it as much, but I think a lot of it is because it's an uncomfortable muscle. It's an area where if we practice it and we evolve and pivot and we adapt, that's how we master it.
No, totally. So in the time that we have left here, maybe if you could spell out, if you maybe had 3 or 4, what would be your top 3 or 4 lessons learned out of this, and what you're going to want to take forward as you evolve because social selling, right, is a skill, and it's something that you want to evolve. So what are some lessons that you would want to share with others and you think that were the key things that came out of this?
Yeah, that's a good question. And thanks again, Tom, for doing this. This has been fun. I think for me, it's sometimes we have to detach ourselves from the personal element. You look at your quota, you look at your, the desired outcomes, and that's where I think we get lost sometimes. We've got to really focus on our inputs and the things that we can control. So, number one for me would really be that controllable element, understanding the playing field. I challenge sellers all the time, like, look at your year or look at the deal that you want to get done and go backward. What relationships are going to be critical in order to get this done? Who's going to need to be involved, both with the customer and internally? What resources are you going to need to get this done? Because that's the boat that you're going to need to build, and that's the boat that you're going to need to get people in with you. So that would be number one, would be like, what's that outcome look like? What's the, think about the probability element and how you understand your playing field. Next would be, really that put yourself in a position of strength. I can't tell you how valuable it was to know so many people in that organization, because especially as things were changing and maybe somebody would retire or a job function would change and somebody was no longer attached to our momentum or whatever it was, just knowing that I could pick up the phone and call any number of these different folks and kind of stay at the pulse of what was actually happening. That was so important. And I know that benefited my replacement as well. She is very, very strong with building relationships. She had a lot of these relationships as well. And so that was so important, was putting yourself in a position of strength with the relationships. Third would be that we'll call it that, adapting and pivoting. So many things changed throughout the course of the last 2.5 years. I mean, my goodness, we were in a pandemic. We stopped meeting in person. We had virtual sessions. Their priorities shifted. The people that we were talking to shifted. The people that were involved from our team obviously shifted. And so through all of that, it's just that, you've got to adapt. I've got my daily list of non-negotiables. I just kind of go down them every day. And I'm like, okay, what do I need to do to impact and influence this? If I need to do something, I do it. If I don't, I move on down the list. And so making sure that you're thinking about your deal or your relationships or all of it holistically, that has been super helpful. But adapting would be number 3. And then the last takeaway would be, being able to optimize all of the resources that are at your disposal, but in the final stretch, like having the confidence and the ability to, call the shots. And I say that less from my own personal experience on this particular deal, but like, there's a lot of noise that happens in these deals, right? There's a lot of people that are involved from both sides. And so I think the key element is to stay at the heart of what it's all about, what you're endeavoring to do. Even if the priorities have shifted, you still have a priority of working together and doing that in a meaningful way. So, really staying true to that, understanding all the resources, but you're the advocate, you're the evangelist for this relationship and for your customers. So being true and standing firm with, what needs to happen, how it needs to happen, whether or not there's ebbs and flows from all of the other players that are involved. You've got to keep a steady hand on the wheel. And I think that's of the utmost importance. And if you apply these principles, I think it can be replicated anywhere. In fact, I certainly hope so, because I'm trying to replicate it multiple.
Yeah, you want to do this a few more times, I think. Well, and that's a great point though about, anytime on social, right? Whether it's within a company or just anywhere, it can get noisy, right? And there's a lot of different shiny objects and places you go down. But I think that comes back to your first takeaway that you mentioned, which is really make sure you know what your outcome is, what your objective is, what you're trying to accomplish, and make sure you don't take your eye off of that as you get into this, as you get into the party, right? Make sure you understand what your goal and outcome is of coming to the party versus just getting dragged into everything, which could very well happen and be very dispersing and actually take away, from things. So I think that's those two together are huge takeaways.
Well said.
On that. The other one last thing I want to just state is I listened to you and it's, this word social selling, right? I don't hear a lot of selling in here. It's like it's almost a misnomer. I hear a lot of help, guidance, trusted advisor, consulting, all of that led to an outcome that was positive to both sides. And I think that's also gotten lost in this thing, social selling. I'm just trying to replicate what I did on the phone. Instead of making a phone call and asking for a meeting or sending an email and asking for a meeting, I'm going to send a LinkedIn, connection request. And well, that's not what we're talking about here at all. So it's almost like a misnomer. It's really using social as a strategy in, accomplishing business goals and business outcomes. And the fact that we got a sale was a natural outcome of that. So it's just
yeah. I mean, for me, like selling without using social selling tools would be like taking my golf bag and not having the driver in it, right? I mean, you can absolutely do it. But how else are you going to effectively tee off the conversation, the discussion, the knowledge, the research? All of those things are so important, and social can give you a leg up.
Well, Carson, you have been my favorite guest so far on our show here.
They're going to get rid of me. They're going to keep you, Tom. You crushed it.
But this is awesome. So I know you said there's going to be some more information coming out on this specific deal, some press releases and all of that stuff, which I'm sure you'll keep everybody up to date with. If you have not checked out his YouTube channel and his show, certainly do so. Anything else, Carson, you'd like to share with anybody before we wrap up here?
No, Tom, this was a blast. I always appreciate our chats, and thanks for the opportunity.
No, this was great, and I'm sure it's going to be super valuable to a lot of people. Expect a lot of questions and a lot more comments, and maybe we'll do a part 2 somewhere down the road here based upon what we get back. So,
anytime.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Tom.